Thank you for logging in to watch one of the LSS Study Skills workshops. My name is Caitlin, and I'm a second-year sociology student and one of the LSS peer helpers. In this presentation, we will be talking about tips and strategies regarding academic reading. Here we go! In this workshop, we are going to talk about academic reading. This will include the challenges of academic reading, how to prepare for reading, and how to read effectively. We'll also review how to read for different disciplines, and finally, we'll cover some tips for reading difficult material. Most classes in university will have weekly assigned readings, so reading is an essential skill for all students, and something you will continue to encounter throughout your degree. Before we get started, you should have already printed the Stop, Start, Continue handout, which was posted as a PDF on the homepage. If you don't have this printed, please stop the workshop and do so. Restart when you have the sheet in hand and a pen. You need this handout because your task throughout the workshop is to 1. See if you can pick up things that you are currently doing that may be inhibiting your success. These go in the stop box. 2. You should also be listening for things that you are doing well. These go in the continue box. And then 3. You need to listen for things that you want to start doing. Try and find at least 2 or 3 of the tips or strategies that I will present today and put them in the start box. By writing down the behaviors or strategies that you want to change, you are creating a plan for yourself and will already be one step closer to becoming a better student. At the end of the workshop, you'll have time to review what you've put down and think about when you can start implementing these changes. First, let's take a look at some of the challenges of academic reading. It is not uncommon to spend a number of hours reading over 40 pages of textbook material per class. Sometimes it is hard to stay focused, and when you finish the readings, you realize that you have little or no memory of what you've read. Readings in university are generally more challenging than those in high school, and because of this, they can take up a lot of your time. The concept of quality versus quantity also comes into play, because you have to make sure you've read effectively, and not just try to get through the right number of pages. University readings also ask you to adjust to different styles of writing, such as journal articles, law cases, novels, or textbook chapters, as well as new content and language. Reading new information normally takes longer than reading information you are already familiar with, and it can be difficult to grasp the meaning of material when you're confronted by new terminology that you may not know. The best way to overcome these challenges and ensure you are getting the most out of your readings is by using the systematic approach called active reading. So, what is active reading? It essentially means that you are reading with purpose and are focused on understanding the material rather than simply trying to get through it. This involves engaging the material by taking notes, writing in the margins, or highlighting as you go. Active reading also means that you are to question the content and to make connections. Your critical thinking skills will allow you to question the information you are being presented with and connect it to the wider themes of the class. Active reading is the first step of the learning process and can lead to greater depth of understanding throughout your degree, and it can also lead to higher grades. It is also important to take into consideration external factors that can impact your ability to read effectively and affectively. Think about when you do most of your readings. On this graph, we can see that students generally reach their maximum performance about halfway between when they wake up and when they go to bed. This means it might be best to avoid scheduling readings early in the morning or late at night in order to ensure you get the most out of your study time. You should also be intentional in deciding where you do your readings. When you're looking for an ideal study space, you want to ensure that the space is distraction-free and in a location where you have access to all the resources you need. You will also want to study somewhere where you will be motivated by your surroundings and reminded of your purpose. It will always be easier to study if the other people around you are also working. However, it is ultimately up to you. You can take these tips into consideration, as well as your personal work habits, and find a place that will work the best for you. For example, my favorite place to study on campus is the quiet floor of the library, or in a study room with my classmates. And before you start reading, it is important to set realistic goals for yourself. You will want to consider planning breaks according to the format and content of the readings. For example, it may be easier to read a journal article about a subject of interest than a law case with new terminology. Planning to read hundreds of pages all at once is not a realistic goal for most students, so you should take into account your attention span and the density of the material. You will also want to consider how you plan to use the information in the readings, because taking notes for a research paper will require different strategies than if you were just preparing for class. And lastly, but most importantly, persistence is key. Giving up and falling behind on readings is one of the easiest ways not to reach your full potential. The best way to avoid this pitfall is to block time in your schedule to do your readings. Now, let's take a look at how to read effectively. I mentioned earlier that it is in your best interest to use a systematic approach to reading, and here it is, known as SQ3R for short. It's just that students survey, question, read, recite, and review. This system will help you ensure that you are reading effectively and actively, so let's go through each step individually. First, we have survey. This is the initial step in active reading and involves gathering the information needed to set your goal. In this case, you will identify how many pages you need to read in what period of time, taking into account what you can expect to encounter in your readings. You can start to determine this by reading the title. It will prepare your mind to receive the subject matter at hand. Then, you should read the introduction, summary, or abstract, which will enable you to focus on the author's most important statements. It will also be helpful to take note of any headings, subheadings, and reading aids, like italics, bold print, and summary questions, as these will help you understand the structure of the reading. Finally, you should always take note of any graphics like charts, maps, or diagrams. They are placed in the reading to make a point, and you will want to ensure you don't miss the information they present. The next step in reading actively is to question. In other words, you want to ensure that you are able to engage and concentrate while reading. To do this, you can create questions by turning the headings of each section into a question you believe will be answered in the text below. Then, when you are reading, your mind will be searching for the answers to your questions. You can add and develop further questions as you proceed, and remember, the better your questions, the better your comprehension is likely to be. You may want to hold on to those questions too, as they can be a great tool for exam preparation. So let's try an example of questioning together. Using the headers, text boxes, and clip art, think about some questions you could formulate to help you through this reading. Let's take a look at the box at the top used for emphasis, with the two contrasting definitions. One of the questions could be, what are the main arguments for free will versus determinism? And if we use the headings, we could also ask, what does free will imply? Or how does the humanistic approach include free will? Now, take a look at the other headings. Are there other questions you could ask? Take a moment to jot some down, just for practice. This task will get easier the more you practice. The next step in the SQ3R process is to read. So your next step will be to read each section of the text with your questions in mind. Just make sure that you stay engaged. You can make brief notes in your own words, write in the margins, highlight, and underline as you go. You also need to schedule in a realistic amount of time for yourself to keep you motivated. Be sure to take regular breaks, especially if you notice you are starting to lose focus. The third step is to recite. This will help you commit the main points to memory. As you're reading, you want to ensure that you stop after each section, look at the questions you've made, and see if you can answer them from memory. If you can't, then you need to reread. Don't move on into the next section until you can recite all your answers without looking at the text. Doing this will ensure that by the end of reading the chapter, you should be able to summarize the information. And finally, the last step is to review. You can now go back over the information and see what has been stored in your memory. If you're missing anything, then you come back and reread that section to solidify your understanding. This will also allow you to bring your notes together and merge the information from your readings with the material you learned in class. It may also be helpful to go through this step of the process with a classmate, just to make sure you've covered as much material as possible. So, that is the SQ3R method. Survey, question, read, recite, and review. You may want to take a minute now just to jot down the tips that will be most helpful for you. So, for our next topic, we'll review the 4 kinds of readings that you may encounter in university, depending on the classes you take. They are math readings, science readings, social science and humanities readings, and primary source readings. You will find that the course subject you are reading for impacts the kind of information you should be focusing on. When looking at math texts, you should try and pay attention to the formulas in general terms and then in an example. Also, look for the symbols, definitions, and additional examples offered in the text. It is always a good idea to at least try some of the examples to ensure you understand the general concepts and know how to use them in practice. Sometimes, students get caught in the trap of not reading these texts due to the practical nature of the subject, but if you do not follow along, it will be harder to find what you're looking for when you really need it. Next, we'll talk about science texts, for which there are actually 2 kinds that you may come across, math-based and text-based. If you have a math-based text, it's usually for subjects like physics or chemistry, and then you will want to treat it similarly to reading a math textbook, being sure to pay attention to formulas, charts, tables, and examples, and maybe try an example or 2 on your own. For text-based science books, which are usually for biology or earth science courses, you will want to concentrate on the diagrams, definitions, and key terms. The material in these texts tends to be more memorization-based, so being able to read for important details is very important. The third kind of textbook you may have are generally used for social science and humanities courses. These texts are summaries of multiple original source theories and research, and because of this, they can be dense with information. When reading these kinds of texts, you need to pay close attention to and make note of details like dates, definitions, names, and locations. You will also want to make note of the background of theories being described. You also should note the differences in perspective that are presented, and similarly, any relationships that you can make in the material presented. And finally, the last type of text you may have to read are primary source texts. These include original journal articles, novels, or legal documents. With these texts, you should be sure to read every part to understand the methodology the author presents and to concentrate on the main arguments or hypotheses. You will also want to make note of any supporting evidence and the conclusions or results that are presented. Now that we've covered the different kinds of textbooks, take a minute to think about the kinds of texts you will be reading for your classes. Are you able to use the tips and strategies that we have reviewed to best suit the kinds of text used for your courses? Now let's take a look at some tips for reading difficult material. These strategies can be used for reading different kinds of textbooks. The first tip is that if you don't understand the text, read the text out loud. Sometimes the concepts become clearer when you actually hear them. Reading out loud also gives more time to process the material before moving on. Another option is to read the conclusion first. Try rereading any sections that you do not quite understand, or even mentally cross out all adjectives and adverbs from a sentence to narrow down the specific meaning. You can also use other resources like the glossary, the professor or TA, or a classmate to clarify the material that you were unsure of. Finally, you can always attend the lecture and ask your questions there. Quite often, you'll find the prof will explain a concept or an idea in a different way than the text does. With this, the material becomes clearer the second time around. Now, let's use the SQ3R process and review the information we have covered today. Feel free to take a minute to write down your favorite tips and strategies from each section as we go. The first topic we reviewed was the challenges of academic reading and what active reading actually involves. Then, we talked about how to prepare for academic reading, how to read efficiently and effectively for different disciplines, and finally, we went through some quick tips for reading difficult material. Now that we've covered the material from the workshop, take a couple of minutes to review what you put down on your Stop, Start, Continue page. What are the things you need to stop doing? These are things that may be hindering your abilities. What are the things that you need to continue doing? These should be things that you are doing well and enable you to achieve your potential. And lastly, what are the things you want to start doing? These should be skills or strategies that you can implement. For these items, I would ask that you take a minute and write down when you are actually going to start doing them. Today, tomorrow. Remember, the sooner you implement these new strategies and skills, the better. I would also encourage you to come into LSS and to attend one of our other workshops in person. We offer a wide variety of topics to meet any student's needs. Workshops are available at varying times throughout the week, including evenings. To see the full schedule, please use the My Success link on Carleton Central and select LSS workshops. Please note that while you are encouraged to register in advance, it's not required. As an added incentive, if you attend 5 or more in-person study skills workshops, you will earn your Skills for Academic Success certificate, which can then be recorded on your co-curricular record. And if you're looking for a more personalized support to develop your study skills, I would like to offer you the opportunity to sign up for a one-on-one study skills appointment. Appointments are 45 minutes long, and you can talk with a study skills specialist about one of the following topics: time management, procrastination, academic reading and note-taking, exam preparation, memory and concentration, listening and note-taking, and learning styles. To schedule an appointment with a study skills specialist, you need to go to the LSS Help Desk on the 4th floor of the McGodrum Library. Finally, if you would like to receive the slides for this workshop, please send an email from your Connect email account to learningsupport@carleton.ca requesting them. Thanks for listening, and I wish you all the best with your academic readings.